All right, so guys, welcome to the MD Senior Living Academy, our monthly webinar series where we invite or talk about different aspects of residential assisted living. So today's topic is really going to be about how to understand valuation in residential assisted living. So if you're not starting from scratch, meaning like you're not going to buy your home and renovate it and get it licensed, but you want to buy something more turnkey, then you have to understand what that process looks like and how do you evaluate the business and the real estate side. So our guest speaker today is Jake Crawford. He's actually a broker out there. He's actually run his own assisted living homes out in Phoenix and Scottsdale, but he's also actively involved in brokering deals both for sellers and buyers. So Jake's got a lot of experience. He's actually helped us acquire a couple of deals. Right now, we're under, he helped us acquire this beautiful property, the Chateau in Arcadia. If you guys want to Google that, you can check it out, but it's also listed on our website. But in addition to that, he's currently helping us close on 3 homes right now, 3 beautiful assisted living properties in the Phoenix and Scottsdale area. So we're really excited to have Jake. Jake, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Oh, thanks, man. I mean, I guess the only other thing I could say is I just like helping good people. There's a lot of people that consider assisted living as a business, and it's like, if you don't really care and you just want to make money, I mean, that's legitimate for a lot of businesses, but I feel like it's been exciting to help a lot of good people get in the assisted living space and make an impact. So that's what I love doing.
All right, so we can't wait. So Jake, I'm going to share the screen that you sent me of all your slides.
Jake, मेरी मीटिंग चल रही है. Jake को देख नहीं.
Just wait, you're on. Oh, I'm going to mute him. All right, I'm going to mute everyone else though. But anyway, Jake, do you want to go ahead and get started with your presentation here?
Yeah, I'll just jump right in, and then we can do a Q&A so we can talk through a lot of practical, scenario questions you guys might have. So whether it's your first time or you own a ton of assisted living properties, hopefully I can just cover the whole spectrum and be helpful to everyone that's here right now. So just jumping down to the second point or the second slide. So it's funny how I feel like at the highest level, things should be super simple, of like golden rule status, where it's like, what do you do? Just do unto others, right? That kind of thing. So at the highest level, what is the actual demand in whatever market you're in, and then what is the actual supply? So it's a very quantifiable thing. It's important to consider. Not a lot of people actually do this before they make an acquisition. They kind of ignore it, or they think they know, but they don't actually really know the real data. So for example, we're talking about the Chateau. There's only like 7 properties in all of Arcadia, Biltmore, Central Phoenix, in the luxury Phoenix market that are 5,000 square foot plus assisted living homes, which you could consider is luxury. So what's the actual supply? It's very low, very fixed for a few reasons. One is, the barrier to entry is higher. So that helps fix the supply and keep it low, because you can't have, 100 people that want to get into assisted living. Maybe only one of them could technically afford and, to be in the luxury space. And then also you have most of the homeowners that own luxury homes aren't converting the properties to a business, which, is the highest and best use of this property from a cash flow standpoint. So there's just a very low supply, which is great. And then what are your city zoning ordinances? So in Phoenix and most every other city in Arizona or Maricopa County, at least, there's a 1/4 mile distance requirement for every 10-bedroom property. So that helps fix the supply. And then what is the demand? And so there's a few different ways I think about that. I just generally going into a market, I like to think that 1% of the population probably, could qualify for assisted living. And then you dial it in even more, where it's like, you can tell what the demand is by shopping other properties. I would call assisted living centers other homes and just shop them, act like you're looking for a loved one. That's a really good way to gauge the demand. I actually did that when I bought my second property. I didn't do it the first time because I learned a lot along the way, and this was some years ago, but I called every 10 bed within whatever, and actually, I think it was within like 5 miles. So it was an extensive demand research situation and supply. And, maybe that was a little much, but I'm glad I did it. And I found out that by calling everyone was 90% plus occupied if they were a nice home, with a decent amount of square footage. And so the demand was there. And so there was room for me. And it was in Peoria, the second home. So it was adjacent to Sun City. So there's a lot of demand. The median age in Sun City is like 78, 80. And so it's just a very simple enough game at the highest level where it's like, okay, where's all the money at? If you have a luxury property, which is going to be the safest asset because of the barrier to entry, are you in a luxury area? Do you have a $3 million property in Surprise or Glendale, or is it in Scottsdale, Phoenix area where all the money is and where all the the luxury homes are and restaurants, entertainment, things to do? So I try to focus on the simplicity of that, where it's like, what does it cost to live somewhere? How does that relate to assisted living? So for example, from a demand standpoint, for the Chateau property, if it costs, 10 grand a month to live on that street, if you bought a property next door, had a mortgage, utilities, everything else, like, if you can spend 6 to 8 grand a month at Chateau and have 24/7 care, and I'm not sure, Dr. Senho, what your rates are right now, but that's just an example where you kind of back into the justification of monthly assisted living rate, based on the immediate demographics. Most people only want to move into assisted living if they live within 5 to 10 minutes. So it's a very hyper local thing, to consider. So don't look at homes that are 20 miles away and consider that helpful data for your supply and demand analysis. Return metrics, and please stop me at any time if I'm like, or if you want to redirect what I'm talking about. I'm just kind of ADD flowing through all this. So return metrics, if you ask 100 different appraisers to appraise a property, you're probably going to get 100 different values. There's a lot of different subjective valuation metrics. One thing I like to look at is a gross.
Yeah, and actually, Jake, we want to focus on that because that's a huge topic.
Yeah,
everyone always has questions like, hey, how do you evaluate something when you're trying to purchase it? And I know you're going to go through that with the P&L and the rent roll and all that.
Yeah, so we can, I guess we can just talk to that later. Then so yeah, I can tell you guys a ton of stories and save you time from different appraisals I've seen in different metrics.
But what's the most common way that they actually appraise an assisted living home and a business together?
So using a grant or a gross rent multiplier or a gross income multiplier is.
Can you explain that for the group?
Yeah. So for example, if the property is bringing in $1 million a year and you have a gross income multiplier of 4.5, which is about, what the market could do. It depends on the property, but somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
And you could justify a valuation of 4.5 million, just at a simple first glance, without having more information about the property. You could just go into an analysis with that number in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Of very simple math. So
Jake, sorry to interrupt the question. Well, is
yeah.
it the NOI you're talking about, or income?
No, the gross,
Okay.
the gross income. You can also use, a net income multiplier. Another metric you could use too that I've seen is a combination of like a rental cap rate. So for example, you would look at the residence rental rate and say it's $6 grand a month, and then as a rental multiplier, you could times that by 2, so 12 grand a month. And then you put a cap rate on that. So you're like, okay, if the resident is paying, or if an owner operator could pay 12 grand, a month for a lease, right? And you put a cap rate on that, what would that value be? You can use a 7 cap, so for that example of valuation, that would be a $1.85 million valuation if you use that metric. So like I said, the gross rental multiplier is probably the simplest one to use, and then using just pure real estate comps. Like it's kind of hard to compare assisted living properties to residential because it's different. It's like, the way I think about it in my mind, it's like converting a car into a monster truck. Like it's forever going to be like, you're not going to change it back to a normal single family home. It's a McDonald's now. It's a single tenant, different commercial asset and the highest and best use in most cases, versus like, the chateau, if you lease it out to a long-term tenant, I mean, maybe you can make maybe 10 grand a month, but hopefully you're making way more for assisted living. So
right, it's not going to cash flow for that purpose, but as an assisted living care home, like it's going to more than enough cash flow. So when he's talking about highest and best use, that's what he's meaning. Like there's no higher and best use for a residential property than turning it into an assisted living home, because instead of having basically one tenant, you have multiple tenants in your home that are paying.
Yes, and high paying tenants. So that's one metric I look at too, of just what is the general similar real estate selling for, and just looking at the single family market, just to know like what are the existing single family homes not assisted living worth in the area, because that speaks to the real estate value in general, and then also the demographics of, if you're in a $2 million neighborhood, your rents should be higher because that is your demand of those homeowners. So those are a few metrics to look at. I can talk, speak more to, I guess one point before I forget is considering the business valuation. That's where it gets really subjective, because assisted living is mainly real estate. So, I mean, whether the business is worth $0 or 500 grand or somewhere in between, it gets really subjective. So that's why the real estate's the main thing to focus on. One thing I like to look at when I'm looking at business valuations is the goodwill, right? So you think about the Apple brand, like that's worth billions of dollars, right? Like just there's certain brands that are actually worth money and they're just a brand. So what is the actual brand worth of the business that you're buying? And I would say one of the main ways to consider what it's worth is by looking at the amount of placement agents and placement fees that someone uses. So if someone can be word of mouth, referral based, or have their own system for marketing, and save yourself, just as an example, if you can save yourself an extra 50 grand a year of placement costs, whether it's one property or multiple, just as an example, if you put a 14% cap rate on that, that's 357 grand in value, right? And so that's one thing I like to consider when I'm looking at the business. I like to start from zero and then work my way up, where it's like, what is the goodwill? What is the FF&E? And so, yeah, that's one thing I like to do for looking.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, we're closing on 3 homes using Jake's help right now. And one of them, right, I believe like she just has a great reputation. It's not even far from one of the other homes, but she gets a lot of self-referrals and word of mouth, so she doesn't actually have to use placement agents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a big deal, right? But then the question is, how do you value that? And that's my idea of quantifying it, where it's like, put a cap rate on it. What does that actually
So, I mean, the take home, I think, really there for the business side is that you can really be aggressive on asking for a much lower valuation, just because they've been just because they have a great reputation and they've filled up the house, there's no sense that it's going to be, that part's going to transfer over, that goodwill is going to transfer over. So even though they may have a lot of goodwill, I still strongly encourage you guys to really negotiate on the business side. It's very hard to negotiate on the real estate side, I feel, because like, you know, it really comes in on what the appraisal comes in or whatever, you know, whatever renovations they've done to make it into an assisted living. But on the business side, it's still very subjective. So there's no really hard, fast and rule that it is this multiplier and all of that.
Right. Yes. Thank you for clarifying. Everything I was really speaking to before is mainly related to the real estate for valuations. But so what else? Should we move on through should we look through this OM as an
Yeah,
example?
do you want to just get, so if you want to give specific examples of what's out there and what you're seeing, especially in this environment right now, because like, you know, people are looking right now. So what does that mean in terms of now versus down the road?
Yeah, so I'll talk through this deal just as an example of how I would look at this objectively and consider the pros and cons. So when I look at this deal, a few things I'm thinking about is one, it's new construction, which is good and a big deal because people want that. So that's good. There's not a lot of new construction, so that kind of helps from a low supply standpoint. All ensuite bathrooms, that's a big deal. It's one of those things where, you know, there are thousands of assisted living units in Arizona. And so if it was me, I think the safest place to be is in just the highest probability scenario, like poker. If you have pocket aces, that's a better hand than 7-2. And so to have all ensuite bathrooms as much as you can, that's just a safer spot to be. There's more demand for that. That's everyone's first choice. So why not have an asset that's everyone's first choice instead of playing in a plan B, you know, low end territory? And that's a whole nother thing I wanted to speak to later, but I guess I will now, is like, you know, if you're looking at acquiring properties, I would strongly consider just the idea of having safety being in larger properties. I think sometimes people get sucked into the idea of assisted living, and then if they want to go spend, you know, the least amount possible and buy a 5-bed or a 7-bed or an 8-bed, you know, for 500 to $1 million, when they could have got a 10-bed for $1.5 million or $2 million or whatever it ends up being in your market. If I was that buyer and if I had to do it over again, because I did buy property, one of my properties was too small, and if I had to do it over again, I would have put my money in a fund or in a bigger asset and pooled it together to have a better asset with partners than to have a single asset that's subpar in a competitive market, because it's competitive everywhere. There's assisted living supply everywhere. It's a big deal in America. So that's one thing to consider. I wouldn't go into underwriting a deal and think that it's gonna, you know, it's a 7-bed now, you're going to keep it 100% occupied and, you know, and all that. I would just be real and just focus on class A, good assets that are safe. And so, anyways, so back to this deal, this technically fits that bill. It's an interesting blend of like, it's new construction, but there's also a value add to it. So it's technically discounted from that standpoint. So it's 2 10-beds that are, you know, near each other as much as they can be, the 1/4 mile distance requirements. And then there's a 5-bed next door to this 10-bed. So that's a big deal because now you can legally have 15 residents. And in Arizona, the max for residential zoning is 10. And then above that it has to be commercial zoning, you know, and typically large centers. There's not a lot of 11 unit to 30 unit centers. It's mainly just you go from 10 units to like 100 plus. There's not a lot of in between because there's just not a lot of parcels that fit that. So this property has the 5-bed next door, and then it essentially functions like a casita. So it's kind of a hack because you can legally have 15 residents, but you can have the same staff for the 10-bed. And so those extra 5 residents in the casita next to the 10-bed, that goes straight to the bottom line, which is a really big deal. So at the end of the day, when you consider all your income and expenses, that 5-bed next door attached to this deal is almost like another 10-bed property for the net income.
And not only that, there's ways to convert that into independent living. So you can have independent living seniors that don't quite need assisted living. And once they need assisted living, they can move into the main house where you get that. You would share like caregivers. So if you have an independent living casita or whatever, you could have the caregivers make food for everyone. So instead of making food for 10 people, you would have it for 15. You could share resources, you can share entertainment. So there's other opportunities beyond assisted living in senior housing that you can expand into.
Yes. So thank you for clarifying. And so part of my focus on this deal too is I like the idea of having a value add option, even if you never utilize it, just to have the opportunity to add value. I think
right. So the take home is not, to try to sell this homes, but the point is that you look for ways to add stuff to it, right? If your house is an 8-bed, but your state allows licensing for 10, well, figure out how you can add extra bedrooms so you can get to 10 beds. Is the plot big enough that you can add ADU units and turn them into independent living? Then that's the way to grow it. Like you can actually increase the NOI a huge amount by doing those little investments.
Yes, and you'd be surprised how many value add opportunities there are in the assisted living world due to the mom and pop ownership demographic. I have a listing right now, for example. It's a 4-home portfolio, and the owners are making enough money and they're happy, and they're just 5 to 7 bed homes, but they could all be 10. And I beg them to convert it because it'd be better for them, but they just don't want to, and they don't care. So someone else will do that deal and make a lot of money. And there's a lot of opportunities out there like that. But I like to identify a value add for every deal I'm looking at. And if there isn't one, it's just less attractive to me, because it's just not as safe.
Jake, talk to me about this, because I always see this in offering memorandums, which is the current pro forma versus like an estimated like future. So, and this is, I always take this with a grain of salt, because it's like, well, if it could be 18, why isn't it 18 already?
Yes. So this one, for example, I know that the pro forma cap rate is in the context of the 5-bed being up and running, because right now it's not. So that's that percentage discrepancy. And the reason why, from my understanding, is that the owner just doesn't care. They have other things going on and other projects that are just take priority over this. So that's the story for that. Should we skip down so we can speak to more of these slides? Location. That's
tell me when to stop. Yeah,
no, just keep going.
These are very pretty.
So this all
and
matters.
by the way, this is not the homes that we're getting. I have asked him to pull up like actual pro formas, but do you kind of want to go through like an actual pro forma and just briefly talk about the income and expenses, or what people can expect?
Yes. So real estate. So just looking at this slide, so real estate taxes, they are what they are, and I know every state's different with how they readjust for sales, but in Arizona, it's close enough to the same. And they're really low. So those are fixed. Probably no value add we can do there. Insurance, similar thing. It's very rare when you find, someone that's paying twice as much as they should be in insurance. But if you did, then that's a value add, right? If you can save an extra $1,000 a month on something like that, and you put a 12 cap on it just for fun, that's $100,000 in value that you could change. Management fee. So there could be a wide swing in this. It really depends on, if you're a mom and pop and you're not even taking or naming a fee, because it's just, you're taking profit, or if you could pay a manager for $1,000 a month, just hanging their license on the wall, or $5,000 a month, or even more. I mean, there's just a wide swing in what you could pay a manager. And I've noticed that it's usually a get what you pay for thing. Like one of the the better properties I've seen that we have under contract that is mainly pure referral based, like they don't have placement agents, just like historically for years it's been that way, right? It's not just a one-off good year for them. The manager is probably the highest paid manager I've seen, but she's the best. So kind of a get
Yes. So let's look. So if we look into this pro forma, one of the things you want to notice is like things like management fee. You notice like years 2 through 11, there's $0. Now,
Yes.
unless you guys are going to be the managers, you're going to have to hire a manager to run the operations, right? So you need to add some of these things back in. Marketing, marketing for us is actually a little bit higher. So when you're looking at this, you can do like a high level, and typically, Jake, I tell people to do like at least 65%, maybe even 70% in the first year of your gross, and then go from there, just to make sure that we account for everything.
Yes, that's a solid rule of thumb for sure. And then, like Sentinel mentioned, this pro forma was built for an owner operator. So we were taking out the management fee, assuming that they would be the manager to make them feel better, about the cash flow and valuation, because most people don't, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, it's important to consider the management fee. That's a big deal. Marketing, like a lot of these expenses could swing, to like a really wide range. But yeah, this 65 to 70%, that's a good rule of thumb. Like repairs and maintenance, food and supply. So here's a whole other thing that you'll see, and we'll see soon on some more slides. But a lot of assisted living owners use the business to write off everything. The air they breathe, the food they buy, like everything is written off, which is a beautiful opportunity, I guess, for this business where you can get away with that. So you'll see in a lot of P&Ls, there'll be 500 to $1 million at the top line, and then it'll zero out or they'll show negative because they write off their entire life. So food, for example, it could be a little higher or lower depending on if the owner is using this business to buy their own food. Landscaping, that's fixed. But once again, you could see landscaping costs in other P&Ls where the owner is using, this to write off their own personal landscaping for their house or whatever else kind of thing. That's really common for these businesses. Utilities are fixed. Nothing you can do to add value there. Caregiver payroll, that's a big deal. That could swing very, it could be a really wide swing depending on you're doing awake staff or not, if you're doing live-ins or not. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And those are all the line items that you really consider.
And this is one of the things where I really love about assisted living, because you have such high cap rates, double digits, very hard to find with this in multifamily or commercial, where you're talking about like 5 cap or 6.
Yeah.
Like they all get excited when it's like a 5+ cap, but you can still find deals with a 10+ cap in this. Now, the caveat is the reason that it's such a high cap rate is because there is an active business component, right? So we're always trying to explore ways on how to make it as passive as possible. So you have this high cash flowing income business producing property, but how do you turn it into as passive as possible? And I think a lot of great operators are able to do that. They're, especially as they grow. We're not the only ones that have like a dozen properties or whatever, but a lot of the operators that know how to really understand this and grow this business know what it takes to hire like the right people from the top down so that they can become as passive as possible.
Yes. And to add on to that, it's very much a what you make it business. Like you can make it where it can be completely passive. Like that's very possible, like wherever you are in the US. It just depends on the right team. So it's the same principle for every business. Like the Bulls in the 90s, you have Michael Jordan. That's what made them great. And with even the simplest business like multifamily, your property manager is a really big part of the equation. And now, granted, why it matters a little more in assisted living because the operator, there's just more on the line. It's like in multifamily, it's probably harder to screw up because the market rents are just so clear and there's probably just simpler data. But yeah, that's just it. Ultimately, it's an exciting thing because it's really simple and there's great operators that you could work with to manage these homes to actually get the 10 plus cap rate. So anyways.
Jake, can you talk about, like, when people are looking in their areas, what are some of the things that they should be looking for in terms of like the population or demographics or like socioeconomic indicators?
Yeah. So I mean, there's that weird saying, that like the rich get richer. And if you're only going to do one deal, like if you could only do one deal, what's the safest best bet? I would just focus on where the money's at. Where is the highest paying tenant, and can you buy that assisted living asset that they're going to be staying in? And that's now, granted, that's just one option. That's maybe not necessarily right or wrong because there's Medicare business models that work great too. But if I'm considering a private pay residential acquisition, I would focus on that. I would try to be as close to where the money's at. So just whatever luxury is in your market, which is typically the top 10% of the price range. So, in Scottsdale, for example, it's really over $2 million is considered luxury, right? But I'm from Wisconsin, so I don't know what the top 10% is there, but maybe it's over 400 grand. So just look where all the $400,000 homes are, because that's where your clients are. That's where your tenants are coming from. And focus on what assisted living assets are there that you can buy. And I would just look at the most expensive ones on LoopNet that maybe you can't afford, and then go down from there. Like I would think big and think maybe partnerships for safety versus spending as little as you can to get a subpar asset that can't compete with future supply or the existing supply. So that's one thing I would do.
Yeah, that's a great point, because if you think about it, those are going to be the baby boomer population that are, it's not millennials living in these like high, like luxury areas. It's really going to be like their parents and their grandparents, and who are eventually going to need assisted living anyway. So that's a great point to think about.
Cool. All right. So now we're looking at, okay, so this is just an example of a tax return. This is a real life tax return. We blotted out the info, obviously, for privacy reasons, but just so someone can see what this could look like from a tax standpoint. And this is also plays into valuation too, because from a lender's perspective, it's going to be tricky to get really easy financing if the seller is writing off everything. So I'll explain add backs right now that you can legally do, or that a lender would look at. So a lender typically likes to add back depreciation, rent, and owner's draw or salary. Outside of that, it's really hard to add back other stuff from a lending standpoint, to come up with a debt coverage ratio that would satisfy a lender, which is typically, 1.2 to 1.3. So you got almost $1 million on the top line. And then I put some notes for add backs just so you could see like the breakdown of, okay, from an actual monetary standpoint, this business really makes 500 grand a year net, but the owner only shows that it makes, or that it made 50 grand. So they're barely paying taxes, and they can technically get away with it because it's so gray of like, okay, you have all these expenses in your own life that you can justify, is for assisted living, because it technically could be if you're a mom and pop owner. This person runs this property remote, which is a lot easier to do when you have a big enough top line that can support a competent manager. Back to the get what you pay for thing. So that's a whole nother thing to consider. I would never plan on being able to have a passive business that's too small. So if that's just an important realization.
Jake, can you just talk about what you would add back to that bottom line again, real quick, just to summarize that?
Yeah, all the owner's life expenses. So you have whatever market expenses are, right? So you have payroll, caregivers are going to be, 15 to 20 grand a month, right? Depending on your model. And then everything else is fixed enough where you can know that everything else that's above that is just an add back that the seller's using this tax return to legally not pay taxes. But anyways, so I think if you go down one slide.
So one other point here is like you can use this tax return because they're trying to shelter a lot of their income. You can use this for your advantage to talk about their business valuation. So if they're asking for some ridiculous valuation, you can say, well, on your tax return, you only said that you made 50,000. So, you can convert the valuation back to them and say, well, you only made this much anyway, so it's really not worth that much. So the point is that you're trying to get a better valuation when you're buying the business as opposed to what they're setting it at.
Yep.
And they'll be like, oh, well, actually, if you add this back, well, that's not what you showed in your tax return. So that's another way to go aggressively against that and come back at them.
Right. Because to look at it from the lender's point of view, you can only add back depreciation, rent, owner salary, maybe a couple other small things, but not the extra 500 grand that she's writing off, So yeah, for example, like client activities, client food purchases, meal prep, and client meals, right? Like that's all obviously personal add backs, but like, is the IRS going to audit this person?
I didn't even know we could do all this, so like definitely we're gonna look into that.
Yeah. So like storage,
Meal
okay,
prep,
month,
wow.
like that's obviously
Meal prep of
storage.
almost $12,000. That's crazy.
Telephone 5,800. That's obviously all the family's cell phones. That's so a lot of this is gray though, because technically you could say, oh, all the food's at the home, but it's really not. So, but moving on, I thought it'd be helpful to actually look through a tax return and just so here's the one home that doesn't really use placement agents. So they only spent, so these are real numbers from last year. So they only spent 7,900 on advertising versus some operators might spend 50 to 100 grand on advertising. So they're crushing it there. That's a big deal. And they've been doing that historically. Client activities. See, this is where, maybe some of these are add backs that the owner is doing for their own personal things, but because there's a lot of free activity type things you can do. There's a lot of nonprofits and volunteers from colleges or whatever that can come in and entertain, the elderly, just like, you see in nursing homes, there's just a lot of free entertainment. So it's kind of, I don't know if that expense is real or not. Food, that might be real. If they're spoiling them, that's a lot of money, but that's totally possible. If they're just doing lobster all the time. Household supplies, maybe like that could be a blended, like what are they buying? 100 brooms a month? It's kind of high. So like sometimes you read between the lines, like, okay, probably personal expenses. 300 grand for payroll. That sounds about right. If you depending on the model, which could be a really wide swing, but 300 grand is 25 grand a month. If you're paying your caregivers 18 and your managers 6, that's or 7. Anyways, cleaning, that's possible because it's a big house. Dues and subscriptions, that's real. Arizona Department of Health and Safety charges almost $1,100 a year for the license. Decor, sure. Accounting seems a little high. So I don't know if they're using this business to write off something else for that. Maintenance, pretty high. Hopefully it's not consistently like that. Hopefully it's, 5 grand a year, not 20. Insurance seems about right. Property taxes is what it is. Phone and internet, they're obviously writing off personal stuff through there. You don't need to spend $1,000 a month for phones. Internet, utilities are fixed. So here's their rent roll. Rent roll looks awesome. 10 residents paying 70 grand a month. That's a really, that's just a great property. There's not a lot of those in Arizona.
Right. So if you use the quick and dirty, like 60 to 70%, even at 70%, I mean, you're talking about, hold on, let me see. You're talking about 250 to 300,000 for 60 to 70% overhead. So there, that's like the quickest way to say, okay, well, are they actually in line, or is it under? I mean, you know, the concern is, are they underestimating like certain things? So that's why you always want to run your numbers, use your pro forma to run your own numbers and see if like you can get similar numbers. So if you have 70% overhead, you're talking about 250,000. So they're stabilized. They're not having as many like placement agency fees that even our group does. I mean, some of our properties, we have $70,000 on top of that. So this group is doing so much better in terms of not having placement agency fees to worry about.
Yeah. Do you want to go to the next slide? So this is, I mean, we can just honestly,
It's a little hard to see, but yeah.
Yeah, we can skip this. I mean, this is, 2022 and 21, and then a monthly breakdown. But one thing I would look for if I was analyzing this deal, I would look at the monthly and see what kind of blips there were, to see how fixed the expenses really are. And then I would ask the seller questions of like, why did you spend 20 grand a month on food, this one month, and it's been 5 grand every other month, just as an example. So
That's right. I lost it there.
oh, you're good. So that's the main thing why I put the monthly one in there, just to mention that thought. But we can move on from that.
Yeah, you want to see if there's some unusual variations from month to month. If they have like a huge amount of decline in revenues, it's not uncommon. I mean, many times patients pass and it almost occurs in like a series. Like you have one, then another, then another, then another. Then you suddenly have like 4 empty beds and there's a huge drop in revenues, but then you build it back up. So it's almost strange, like how people pass in like almost a succession, which can really affect that top line and affect those numbers. So you want to see it. So it's not unusual to have huge swings in your net income.
And here's something else to mention too, since a lot of these are mom and pop businesses, there's a lot of emotions usually involved on the seller side. So for example, like the numbers tell a story. So if you see in payroll, there's a spike, a few grand in 1 month, like you ask the seller what happened and they're like, oh, I forgot, because they wanted to forget because they're so emotionally involved. They want to keep it positive, but like they had an employee that left for whatever reason and they needed temporary staffing and they couldn't find it. Like it's good to find out, how stable are their staff? How many years have they been there? What's their turnover like? Any kind of worst case scenario stories they've experienced at the P&Ls, you can see that. All right. So this one, so this is a 6,800 square foot, 10 bed. So this floor plan is actually phenomenal. I would like, if you were building new construction, I would model this floor plan. If you're starting from scratch, this is just a great model. You walk in the front door, everything's open concept, kitchen, huge living and dining room, and then a separate family room area, and then just rows of rooms with huge rooms and ensuite bathrooms on either side of the house, and then a really tranquil backyard. So this is a great, like an A+ floor plan. I don't know how much better a floor plan could honestly be. It's like it's really optimal. The rent roll. So here, this is a great example of just looking at finding opportunities. So the other deal we just looked at, their gross income 70 grand a month. This deal is 60 grand a month. And I think the condition of this property is better than the other ones. So in my mind, I think that's a value add here to increase their rents. And this owner isn't isn't capitalizing on that opportunity. And so I think that you could feasibly raise the rents here, which is the lowest hanging fruit value add. If you can buy a class A asset and raise the rents, that's awesome. Normally, you know, you got to buy a class B or C, bring it up to an A, then raise the rents, you know, that kind of thing. So that's one thing I really like about this deal. Another thing I'll say that I like about this deal as a value add opportunity is the tax return we were looking at earlier, the 10 bed that grossed around a mill. One of their secret sauce things is that they have signage off of Scottsdale Road, which is, you know, thousands of cars driving by every day. So that was a very simple but helpful thing where everyone knows that that home is assisted living from driving by it, and then Google Maps, you know, for free with 5-star reviews. So they don't use placement agents either. And so I would go, you know, get a permit from the city of Phoenix and put a sign in the front yard of that home because it's on a busy street. And that could be worth, you know, 500 grand in value over 5 years or 10 years if I'm saving that money in placement agents for just a simple sign. So I try to look for low hanging fruit, just lay up value add opportunities. You know, I'm not trying to make a full court shot and you know, bank on. I just like low hanging fruit stuff. So I like that deal for that reason. So this owner's actual P&Ls look just like, you know, the tax returns that we saw earlier. Everything zeroes out because of personal expenses. So I just made this to clean it up and look at simple numbers, you know. So this is a pro forma, but it's kind of a mix of real and pro forma numbers. So obviously the rent, I'm saying it's 65. It should be 65 grand. It's 59 now. I'm obviously conservative on that. You know, I'm not saying it should be 100. Should probably be 70 plus, but like whatever, 65. And then advertising, you know, 24. That's, you know, that's kind of somewhere in the middle of referrals, and then just a handful of placement agents a year. Client activities, I mean, that's, you could get, like I mentioned earlier, that could just have a wide swing of, are you getting the same thing for free with volunteers, or are you paying for it? Food, $3 grand a month, that seems reasonable, give or take.
Yeah.
Supplies, you know, payroll, 20 grand. So this
And our
is
payroll for 10-bed facilities have ranged from 16 to 20, so that's in line. You know?
yes. And then it could just have that wide swing too of like, are you the caregiver and the manager for this, you know, group? Probably not. And then, you know, how big of an asset do you have to run it remote and hands-free? Because I've never seen a small home operate hands-free passively. There has to be a large enough top line to cover competent payroll. Anyways, so everything else we already kind of talked through in other P&Ls, but yeah, that home's just another, I guess. Can we go to the second floor plan?
Yeah. This one?
Yeah. So this one, just to talk through like how I would analyze this, I like that almost every room is en suite. It'd be nice if they were all en suite, but it's close enough. There's certain things in this property that carry that through to still make it a home run deal. The yard is like a resort style 3/4 acre luxury yard, so that's helpful for marketing and for lifestyle, you know, for the clients. And then there's a casita at this property that's not on this floor plan, that's a value add. And all these properties, Hill mentioned it earlier, but the option of doing independent living is awesome for all these properties because the lots are large enough where you can actually do that, because they're almost all an acre. So but this deal is 45 grand right now for a rent roll. Obviously they're missing a resident, so they're 90% occupied, not 100, but this could probably realistically be a 60 grand a month gross property. So that's a low hanging fruit value add, I would say, to just dial in the operations, have, you know, a little more. And then the slide below.
So the important thing to know is that like your expenses don't change right? Having 9 versus 10, and your expenses don't change by increasing the rent roll from 4,500 to 6,000, because you have to keep up with inflation, you have to keep up with labor prices, you have to keep up with the interest rates that you're buying into today. So you have to charge a little bit more. It's unfortunate that we have to do that, but that's the only way to be sustainable and to be competitive with other homes out there.
And one point, just to tack on to that, if someone's paying $6,000 a month in an area like this, where you couldn't buy a home on this street for less than $1.5 million, $2 million, like, if you factor in the cost of living in this neighborhood, food, utilities, everything else, rent or mortgage, and then how much would it cost for home health to have someone come live in a caregiver or a nurse 24/7? I mean, you could spend, $5 to $10 grand a month without even having 24/7 care, and then spend 15 to 20 grand for home health. So you come to this home for $6,000 a month, and that could be a good deal. So it's all relative, right? And so that's another thing to consider too, where it's like $6,000 could be competitive. It could be a good deal. So anyways, I just want to mention that.
Perfect. So we're almost at time here. Do you guys have any questions that you want to pick Jake's brain about?
Or any deals you want to run by me that we could objectively talk through?
I'm going to stop the screen because I know. Wait, let me make sure.
Hi, I just had a question. This is Amar. So I mean, you talked about being close to an area that's, I guess, affluent or semi-affluent. For example, in like a large metroplex, like for example in Texas, we have a lot of large metroplexes. I mean, it's really not a big deal for people to drive, 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes or whatever. So I mean, in like a large metroplex type of area, I mean, are we still looking at, most people like being, 5 to 10 minutes away, family members like being 5 to 10 minutes away. I'm just trying to get like, an idea of the, I mean, you want to be in a nice area, but within the metroplex, you could have nicer suburbs, relatively speaking. So
yeah, that's a good question. I would just do the best to be as close to the money as you can. So if it's a farther drive and things are a little more spread out, I get it, but like just have the highest probability scenario. Like if you're thinking about 10 different neighborhoods or enclaves, it's like, okay, well, which area has the most affluent pocket, and then just pick that as the target instead of trying to be, 30 minutes from all of them, kind of like just narrow down to the niche of the highest end market. Do you want to give me like more? Is that helpful, or can I expound on that?
Yeah, that's helpful. Like for example, like we live in Fort Worth. There's like nicer pockets within Fort Worth, but then there's like suburbs that are maybe like 20 minutes away that are like, some of them are really nice as well. So just trying to get an idea of, I mean,
honestly, Amber, 20 minutes is not a big deal. Like, living in California now, like, 20 minutes is like, that's the closest thing for us out here. So I know it might seem far for a lot of people, but if you have a great facility that's in a good demographics, in a good neighborhood, the family members can drive 20, 30 minutes, even an hour, right? They're trust me, at first they feel guilty. They're going to try to come there every weekend, right? But then that slowly peters down anyway. So that 20 minutes is not a big deal over time. So if you have what Jake's saying is like, you got like an area that's more affluent and you have more land there and more square footage, I would go there and try to put it there because they'll eventually come there anyway.
All right, thank you.
What else?
So Jake,
Yes, sir.
Jake, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, all right. So Jake, when you evaluate the business part, say if the NOI is say 100 grand, how do you value the business? Is it 2x or 5x or 10x? Because it varies. It's a general rule of thumb.
Good question. So yeah, I've seen 2x, but once again, back to the how subjective it can be. I would focus not on the NOI, as I wouldn't use the NOI multiple as my first choice. To value the business, I would just start from zero and use and look at what they're paying placement agents. And if they're not paying placement agents, use that money that you're saving and put a cap rate on that. So whatever cap rate you feel comfortable underwriting the deals. For example, if you're saving, let's just say you're saving 20 grand a year from the business actually having referrals and not paying placement agents, picking the right tenants that might be there for 1 to 5 years instead of like 1 month on hospice. So, you know, a 20 grand at a 12 cap is 160 grand in value. And then start from zero with what's the furniture worth, 5 to 20 grand, maybe more, you know. So I would more focus on that, because then you're focused on what really matters, which is how is their business reputation, and you're focused on that valuation and not a general NOI multiple that there's just a lot that could slip through the cracks there. I would just keep itemize, you know, those handful of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And for the real estate, obviously these are RALs. We can't really compare an RAL like a 5,000 square feet RAL to a 5,000 square feet house in the neighborhood, the same zip code. So do you value the real estate lesser than the home or more than the home, like a comparable home?
Good question. So I like to typically more, because you're paying for like you're paying for the cash flow stream. So it should have a higher valuation, all things being equal, than just a traditional single family home from an investment standpoint. I just like to look at the single family market to consider the general baseline for what the real estate's worth, you know. And then like it would just scare me if, you know, there's a 4,000 square foot property and that's $2 million, and then the other 4,000 square foot properties within a couple miles are $1 million or just something so far off the mark.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of more of a side note metric I like to use as just a safety net for the overall general value. And then yeah, I mean, in a commercial appraiser, you know, you're going to spend 3 to 7 grand on that versus a residential appraisal for $300. And so they're going to go through more of a cash flow valuation analysis and look at other 10 beds, because it's like comparing McDonald's to McDonald's, and not to another house. So you're right to say, like, how can you look at other single family homes to justify value? But I mainly just do that to make sure that there's nothing really off the mark.
Got it. Okay.
You're within realm. And then, like I mentioned too, the last thing is making sure that the demand is there, right? If you're in an area where there's, you know, 5,000 homes that are like luxury homes, those families, whether they're over 70 or they're baby boomers with parents, those people are your clients. So they look on Google Maps, and, you know, because normally it happens quick. When someone has a loved one that needs to move into assisted living, normally people aren't proactive, they're reactive. Their mom has a fall at the house. Oh my gosh, what do we do? Google Maps, adrenaline's rushing. Like, where's the closest place? Like, where's the nearest hospital? Where's the nearest assisted living, right? It's like, what is the immediate solution? So it's really that simple and smart to focus on just being where the money's at as best you can. So
got it. That's useful. Thank you.
Cool, for sure.
Perfect. Anyone else? All right. Well, fantastic job, Jake. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom in this. So this is recorded, so you guys can always refer back to it. But Jake, do you have any closing statements? Yeah. And by the way, guys, if you are interested in getting your own assisted living, Jake is available to help you guys out. We're actually looking at ways to find like management out there in Scottsdale and Phoenix to see, like, so if you guys wanted to have an opportunity where you had your own RAL, at least in Phoenix and Scottsdale, Jake can help you get started off the ground. MD Senior Living, we're not really looking to do active management because we have our own stuff going on, but we would certainly help with the marketing side of things and leveraging our experience, but would help you find a manager out there as well. But that's another option to consider if you guys want to get started out there and don't have an opportunity close to you though.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is just call, text me anytime. If you guys need anything or even just want to run.
Jake, do you want to throw your number up there?
Yeah, so my cell is 480-766-2973.
And I'll include it in like the webinar presentation afterwards as far as the replay goes.
Yeah, so if you're in another state, like I said, I just like helping good people that want to make good investments and help these tenants, like all these tenants. That it's a big deal if we're the operators doing a good job versus someone else and they're in they're in bad hands. So I'd like to help you even for free, just analyze deals anytime. Like I said, I've just helped a lot of people in this space, and I've seen a lot of different models and acquisitions and dispositions, and if I could save you some time from figuring things out on your own.
And Jake, do you want to tell them your website real quick?
Yeah, it's just, my general real estate website is just topcomp.com, topcomp.com. But just, yeah, call or text me anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you guys joining us now. And so if you guys for the next month's webinar want to provide like questions or like a topic, suggest a topic, I can find individual speakers for that, but we'll go from there.
Can I just ask one last thing? Was this helpful to everyone? I'm just curious.
No, it actually wasn't. Sorry.
Okay, so yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Jake.
But for real though, like, was this helpful for people?
It was helpful, Jake. Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For sure.
All right. Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you, Jake, so much. Bye-bye.
Of course. Have a good day.